And what I'm going to do is run through a slideshow, and understanding that complex PTSD is basically we have imprints from early childhood where we've been through maybe abuse as children, and we carry these imprints. And for some of us, well, you know, it's from this lifetime, and some of us may believe that it's from our past. And some may believe that, you know, it's our karma, and we've got all of these different beliefs about what trauma is. But ultimately, we have complexes, and complexes are, a complex is a core pattern of emotions, memories, perceptions, and wishes in the personal unconscious, organized around a common theme, such as power or status. But basically, this is to do with the work of Gustav Jung. And what we have is that some of us have had trauma that we're living out day to day, and we find it really difficult to cope with life. So I'm going to run through a few slides, and if anybody joins, then chat if you want to. And I'm going to go to the next slide. So what we have is the next slide. Let me see. Okay, so the idea would be to ask ourselves, in order to begin the healing process, is to understand what healing is. So we can ask ourselves, you know, what is healing? What is it? What does it mean? Because for each of us, it's going to mean something different. But as far as I'm concerned, it's going to be at some point, it's working to the point that which affected us no longer does. Now, clearly, with CPTSD, it's not so cut and dried, because we have something called flashbacks, and we'll have the fight, flight, freeze, fawn response, which means that sometimes we're going to get triggered by people, and it's going to mean that we're going to act in particular ways. And what we want to do is get to a point of understanding what we're responding to, what our triggers are, so that we can begin to evolve the being triggered, and then begin to heal that part of ourselves that's been shattered in childhood. And that would be by beginning to ask the question, you know, what is healing? You know, what do I want? And also getting conscious about what we are healing, and the complexes that we have, and the triggers, and so many things that we need to look at. The next slide is something that Carl Gustav Jung said. He said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. So a lot of us can see that what happens from childhood trauma, that if we look at our adult lives now, we can see that a lot of patterns that we experience now, and a lot of the feelings of loss, abandonment, and betrayal are carried out into our adult lives. So we'll get into situations and get involved with people that create further loss, abandonment, and betrayal. And it's very difficult for us to understand that we have to, you know, become the security we seek is inside ourselves. And that's quite spiritual terminology. And the difficulty is that we do need each other on planet Earth. We're human beings, so we do need each other. So it doesn't mean that we just become totally sort of cold, and, you know, the security I seek is inside myself, and that's it, and I don't need anybody. We do need each other. But Carl Gustav Jung did say that until we make the unconscious conscious, it will direct our lives, and we will call it fate. So it's really important that we begin to look at what happened to us in childhood, how it does affect us as adults, and then begin to understand complex PTSD at deep levels. And there's ways of doing this that we can, you know, enhance and speed up our healing through knowledge. And there's a lot of knowledge out there, and each of us are going to turn to different things at different times. And I'm going to read a little bit from a book in a moment, which is going to help you understand trauma and the self-care system, from a particular book that I've got. I'm going to read a couple of pages. But going on to the next slide, what does CPTSD response looks like? You can see this little thing that I've got here, this little meme that somebody posted this yesterday, actually a friend of mine on Facebook, and I loved it because it really touched in with me of what PTSD, complex PTSD does look like. And it's quite unnerving to have it. It's really difficult for us to cope with it. And particularly when we don't understand what it is, and when we get more knowledge and understand what it is, then we can begin to break it down and to thrive. Basically, we want to go from surviving, as Pete Walker would say in his book, from surviving to thriving. And that's going to be through knowledge. And that means that we have to put in the work to some degree to enhance, speed up things, expecting to be healed from other people and not do our own work is just drawing out. It's going to make the process much longer. So what PTSD, CPTSD does look like, and I know this for a fact, I went through many, many years of avoid thinking about my trauma. I used to drink alcohol, which meant that I didn't have to address the pain that I was in. And then we've got flashbacks, which are, they happen and then we get triggered, and it's very unnerving and, not a nice thing to experience at all. It causes a lot of anxiety as well, and panic attacks. Lack of concentration, we cannot concentrate. There's a lot of negative thinking, a lot of inner critic work that we need to do, because the inner critic is basically, is very negative and very harsh on us. And often that's not our voice. It's the voice that was implanted into us by people that were abusive to us in childhood. So again, that's something that we need to look at. There can be difficulty sleeping for many. I know that I had lots of nightmares because of my own traumas, and it's taken me very many years to come to terms with my dreams and, how I sleep, and working out ways to heal that in myself as well. Feelings of guilt and shame due to thinking that there's something wrong with me, or that I'm not good enough, or that I should be over something that I've not grieved, for instance, that we don't understand that we need to grieve any losses that we've been through. It can cause a lot of negative moods, where we can always be on guard as well. We're always looking over our shoulder. We don't trust people. If we've not been able to trust our carers or our parents, then we're always going to be on guard and be hyper vigilant. And again, we can give ourselves a hard time about that, but that's the way we were trained. So we've got to realize, what's going on. There can be a loss of interest in things, and bad dreams. I was speaking to somebody about that today, about my own dreams as well, and how difficult that's been for me to deal with. But I've gotten a lot better at it in the last couple of years. So the next slide is that if you see here, you've got a tree without any leaves on, and then the roots of the tree are below. And what basically, we need to bloom. So we need to get to the root of the problem. And this is something that we can do through knowledge and through reading material that's going to help us to evolve. It's not going to happen on its own. We can't magic it away. And also, when we begin to look at our pain and what is unresolved in us, we're going to begin to bloom, definitely. I have myself, so I can tell you that however hard it is, we can begin to flourish. And this book that I refer to is one book that I suggest, and the links for this book are below the video, and you can get it free on Audible USA, Amazon Audible USA. You can get a free copy of Complex PTSD From Surviving to Thriving by Pete Walker. And you can also get it on Kindle UK, Amazon Kindle UK. You can get a free copy of this book. So if you have not got this book and you have complex PTSD, which is not a disorder, it is a response to events, lots and lots of trauma, generally in childhood, but clearly it can be, not just from childhood as well. So we need to look at getting a whole copy of this book. I've got a hard copy of this book, and I also have it on Audible, and I sometimes listen to it. Not so much now. I spent 2 years really going through this book to solve a lot of my own problems. And when I began to understand what was going on, that's when I began to resolve a lot of the problems that I was having. So the next slide is this book. This book is called Trauma and the Soul, and it's a very, it's a hard book to read, but not hard. It's, it refers to the soul, and it talks about how the trauma in childhood, it splits the psyche and it causes fragmentation. And we then begin to try and protect ourselves from, fears, or things that we think are going to happen that, you know, as adults aren't going on anymore. And the main way to heal this is by, you know, having therapy, looking at our dreams, getting knowledge, and beginning to look at our lives. And for many people that I know myself, I had to, in order to really get to a point to deal with my own trauma, it happened through me having a breakdown in 2016. And often a lot of people who do have breakdowns end up really becoming awake to what's going on. And it's a breakdown point. And it would be better if we didn't reach that point, but this is what happens for a lot of people. We get so triggered, we've got so much unprocessed stuff, and then we begin to, you know, we need to look at it. So the body and the psyche, you know, produces a breakdown almost, so that we can then begin to look at it, and then we'll get the time to look at it, because we can't function as we normally were able to, for instance. And I'm going to read a little bit from this book, 2 pages from this book, page 10 and 11, and it's trauma and the self-care system, which is important to understand what that means. And the next slide is just, this to me is where we're opening our heart to the universe. It might look a bit scary, but it's basically where we allow the light back in, and we allow the light back into our soul, and we begin to shine again. And the fracturing, we get rid of that, so that all those fractured fragments of us that have been so traumatized begin to heal, and we begin to shine as we weren't able to do when we were youngsters or children. So here goes. I'm going to read a little bit of a section here. So if anybody wants to comment, please do. As I, you know, and when I've read these 2 pages, I'm going to stop sharing my slides at some point, just in case anybody does want to ask any questions. So this is from the book Trauma and the Soul by Donald Cowshed, and it's Trauma and the Self-Care System. So here we have, he says, early relational trauma results from the fact that we are often given more to experience in this life than we can bear to experience consciously. And this problem has been around since the beginning of time. Clearly, we know that, you know, many people have been through abuse, but it is especially acute in early childhood because of the immaturity of the psyche and of the brain. We are ill-equipped to metabolize our experiences. And he says, an infant as young or a young child, an infant or a young child who is abused, violated, or seriously neglected by a caretaking adult is overwhelmed by intolerable effects that are impossible for it to metabolize, much less understand or even think about. A shock to the psychosomatic unity of their personality threatens to shatter the child to its very core, threatens to extinguish the vital spark of the person, so crucial for the experience of aliveness and so central to the later experience of feeling real. So, you know, it can cause us not to feel real in the world. He says here that such a shattering of the childhood psyche would be an unimaginable catastrophe. And he says, he refers to it as soul murder, as one investigator called it, and that's Schengold, and that was 1989. Somebody wrote that, said that it is, you know, to abuse a child, is to shatter a child's psyche is soul murder. And I agree with that, because the reclaim after that, it takes many years to reclaim the soul. He says, fortunately, this shattering almost never happens, at least not completely. He said, instead, a life-saving split occurs that we call disassociation, and disassociation seals over non-being. It prevents annihilation of the unit self, substituting multiplicity and an archetypal story that implicitly holds the parts together. So what we will do as children, if we've been through abuse, then we will begin to disassociate very early on, and then we'll carry that through our adulthood. And we all do it in different ways. You know, I'll give you a couple of examples. Like, people can do it through getting involved in codependent relationships, and it can be using alcohol or drugs. It can be over shopping. It can be, it's just basically where you put your blinders on, like you really don't want to feel, so you just begin to disassociate. A lot of children will acquire OCD tendencies very early on, just to protect themselves. And I know I did myself, that they carried on into my adulthood, which I'm dealing with them now as well. So he says it prevents annihilation of the unit self, substituting multiplicity and an archetypal story that implicitly holds the parts together. The unbearable effect is distributed to different parts of the psyche. These parts cease to know about each other so that the personality does not have to suffer the unspeakable horror of trauma as a whole. We could say that the psyche shatters itself along inborn fault lines, and that the discontinues or gaps open up in our experiences. These self-divisions have survival value because they save a part of the child's innocence and aliveness by splitting it off from the rest of the personality. And he says, preserving it in the unconscious for possible further growth, and surrounding it with an implicit narrative that is eventually made explicit in dreams. So the point here is that when we do that, our dream state can really be quite heavy for us. We can have a lot of nightmares and a lot of scary dreams. And dreams basically are showing us what needs to be healed in ourselves. So it's really important that we begin to look at our dreams as well as signs of, what's going on and what needs to be healed in us. And, there's many things to look at with CPTSD. He says that this allows life to go on, albeit at a terrible price. Loss of the animation and vitality that has always been associated with an ensouled living. So, children have souls. You can see them when they're playing with things, and their laughter and their joy, and they're so inquisitive. But when a child's abused, that part of them is switched off and they shut down. And some children have had to mature so quickly due to abuse, and you can see that it can then run into adulthood, and there can be a joyless life, like the spark has been taken away. So it's our job to get the knowledge to bring that spark back to life. That's what this picture is about that I'm showing you on this slide, to re-enliven ourselves. He says here also that, so ironically, dissociative defenses save a vital core of the self while simultaneously losing it or losing it partially. They preserve the seed by cutting it off from life in the world, at least for a time. He says evidence for this of the inner division in the traumatized psyche of a child is well established by object relations theory. So this book, actually, it does get quite deep, so I'm not going to go on and on with this book, but I really would like anybody who's watching this that does have CPTSD to take on board that the Pete Walker book is going to be your roadmap to healing your early childhood trauma. It lays it out, and it talks about flashbacks, the fight, flight, freeze, fawn response. The fight, flight, freeze, fawn response, we've got the healthy part of it, and then we've got the unhealthy, not that we're unhealthy, it's just that that's the way we've been set up to, deal with our triggers. So the next slide, which is very important, that, Carl Gustav Jung did say, he said, as far as we can discern, the sole purpose of human existence is to kindle a light in the darkness of mere being. So the other thing we can do is understand that, the own darkness that we've acquired through humanity or the inhumanity that goes on, we can begin to see that we've got to bring the light back into our own lives as well, however difficult it is, that, however we're dealing with flashbacks, triggers, memories, by really getting this knowledge, and we're going to be able to evolve. Okay. Now, something you can do for yourself is you can do these reparenting affirmations, and you want to be working on your inner critic and getting rid of your inner critic. And reparenting affirmations are basically like you would speak to a child. So if I had a child, and I would love it, I wouldn't be abusing it myself. And for those that have been abused, we've got to learn to speak to our inner child in such a way that it helps us to grow and evolve. So this is something that you can do. And if you want a copy of this, this is in his book. So I suggest that you do get that, but also if you want a particular copy of this, I'll post it below this video in the comments box. He says, reparenting affirmations, Pete Walker, complex PTSD from surviving to thriving. So if you were speaking to yourself, you could say, or your inner child, I am so glad that you were born. You are a good person and I love you. I love who you are and I'm doing my best to always be on your side. You can come to me whenever you're feeling hurt or bad. You do not have to be perfect to get my love and protection, and all of your feelings are okay with me. I am always glad to see you, and it's okay for you to be angry, and I won't let you hurt yourself or others when you are. You can make mistakes, that they are your teachers. You can know what you need and ask for help, and you can have your own preferences and tastes. You are a delight to my eyes. You can choose your own values, you can pick your own friends, and you don't have to like everyone. You can sometimes feel confused and ambivalent and not know all the answers. I am very proud of you. So you can see here that, you know, this is the way the dialogue that we need to incorporate, speaking to our inner child, getting rid of our inner critic. So I think that's it. I'm going to stop share. And here I am. Okay. So I don't know if anybody's got any questions there. Let me see if I get rid of this screen and that, and I'm back here. Okay. So I've got 3 viewers. So I don't know if this was helpful for anybody, but you know, the book that I've basically just read from, which is a bit complex, is The Trauma and the Soul. The other book that you want to read is Pete Walker's book. And this is just a short video today to just put some ideas out there. And to understand, you know, when people say to you, for instance, something else like the deeper work of psychology, they call it a complex. So we have complexes. So that you might hear people say, like, I've got a, you know, she's got a mother complex or she's got a father complex. It's basically where it's a core pattern of emotions, memories and perceptions that have, you know, been imprinted into us that have not been healthy and that we can begin to heal. So there you go. That's it for today. I'm not staying any longer than this. It's late in London, but I'm here. You come over to Facebook if you want. If you're a lady and you watch this, then I've got a ladies group on Facebook. But also, if you're a guy, there are groups that I know for CPTSD and complex PTSD, meaning complex PTSD, that I can put forward and give you information on that you can join. Okay, thanks for watching today. Thanks. Catch you later.